The tick would only seem to happen when it was your close-up. On his close-up, he was good as gold. Inside of the school, they have this like sort of screen, and there are like 15 different scenarios. What would you do if someone was holding someone hostage and they had a knife in their hand, and you've got your gun and you've got to decide whether to shoot or not? I didn't get sent a screenplay. I just got sent an audition. All I knew was that it was the follow-up show of the showrunner of Mare of Easttown, and I got sent a self-tape to play this character called Anthony Grasso, who was like a South Philly Italian-American detective. Yeah, I was pretty much like, like ticks every... Mark Ruffalo had been cast, I think, and so it was like a bit of a no-brainer. Mark was one of the like great comic human beings I've ever met, and he just wants to make everyone feel like at any moment the scene's going to fall apart because they're going to start laughing. And he operates incredibly well in a space where you never quite know if his character is looking at you with a certain look or he is. Somehow Alison and I fell victim to that on a really regular basis. And I think there were some scenes that you're amazed they've even managed to cut together, takes that are usable given how much we were laughing. He would decide that his character was hungover and so he'd be burping his way through the scene, or like he decided that he had like a bit of a tick that day and so he'd like come in and do a bit of a tick, but the tick would only seem to happen when it was your close-up. On his close-up he was good as gold, and then the camera would turn around and suddenly Mark's like doing things. We had to be removed. Sometimes they would have to stop the scene and then they would ask us all to leave so that we would but then it was worse because you'd come back and you'd have built up all this anticipation of what the scene was going to be when you went back. Yeah, I really don't know, honestly. I would honestly have to think quite like deep things. I'd have to be like think of like, really sad things happening in order for me to not laugh. But then what I would be doing is I'd be like looking into the abyss, and I wasn't very present in the scene. So then like Jeremiah the director would be like, you need to look at Mark when he's talking, and I'd be like, well, I don't think I can do that. And like I guess for me, because my character's the mole, right, the whole season, I'm trying to like cover this up, and so I was trying to work out whether I would like layer this story with this kind of like that sometimes my character is like having a moment where he thinks he might get caught, and every time I would do that, Mark would look at me like it was the worst acting decision I'd ever made. I couldn't, so I stopped.
Some things are gonna come out about me. I can't live with it no more.
Post Ep 6, we know that Grasso's been the informant to the gang, and I suppose the conflict for that is that I don't think he ever wanted to be involved in that in the first place. We find out in the 7th episode that the reason that he did that was because his mother was very sick and he couldn't afford the health care on his own, and he was also helping his sister out, who was in a not very nice relationship, and he was helping facilitate her life as well. And there's only so much that a police officer can afford, especially I think he's in his late, like 28-year-old police officer. And so I think that the major conflict is that he was involved with them prior to the case. The case was never supposed to blow up the way that it did, and now he's in a huge dilemma where he's developed relationships with people that he genuinely cares about, but it also has a relationship with this gang that are causing all these problems within Pennsylvania. And I suppose the pull of that, his care for Tom and Leah and Lizzie, and his sort of hatred, I suppose, or disgust with himself at the fact that he was ever involved with these people in the first place. But obviously at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. I think the scene where Lizzie dies in episode 6, just the sheer sort of amalgamation of so many emotions for someone who's almost entirely responsible for the death of this girl that he really genuinely has fallen for, not necessarily just romantically, I think as a human being, and just knowing that all comes to a head literally in one scene. And I suppose like I was nervous that how whether I'd be able to like portray that in a way that felt viable, if that makes sense, because obviously I haven't personally like been in that position. I really didn't know anything about Pennsylvania, and I didn't know anything about cops really. So yeah, I mean, like I watched obviously a lot of that, especially like Italian American centric podcasts and like a lot of cooking shows. So I think like the food culture is so big in Philadelphia, and especially in the Italian American community out there, it's such a like massive part of their lives. So it was a lot of hanging around sandwich shops in Philly, and there's like a famous Italian restaurant out there where a lot of the Italian American community hang out. Ultimately, there's only so much access we have to the realities of what being a police officer are in the United States, and so we were immersed as much as we could be within Easttown's police department, and the individual police officers that we were allowed to spend time with, because obviously my character's a detective, so I spent some time with some detectives, and he specializes in increased crime, crime for the FBI, or organized crime for the FBI. So I spoke to FBI agents about what that entails specifically, opposed to just being a state trooper, or opposed to being another member of the police force. And actually the chief advisor on the show was the chief of police in Easttown, where Mare of Easttown is set. So he'd been the advisor on Mare of Easttown, and he's now a co-writer on Task. Super fascinating, a guy called Dave Obzad, who helped me a lot. We were lucky enough to train with some of the police force out there. We spent a lot of time like learning how to handle weapons, and they actually took us to they have these, I guess now technology's so advanced, but they have these kind of places where it's really hard to explain, but it's like a sort of school where they teach cops to be cops, but inside of the school they have this like sort of screen where you're put in a room with a gun, and then they enact scenarios, but they're really like it's real actors, and there are like 15 different scenarios. What would you do if someone was holding someone hostage and they had a knife in their hand, and you've got your gun and you've got to decide whether to shoot or not, or like you've been sent to someone's reported something questionable that's happening, and you arrive, and it's like a guy in a kitchen, and he's hiding something underneath the table, and you don't know what it is, but like it could be a gun, right? And that's what's so crazy out there. It's something we don't think about as much here in Europe, you'll have to kind of be ready to do something, and so often like the guy underneath is holding like fucking like plate of apples, and then you shoot, and then you've killed that poor man, and then you have to sort of burden the responsibility of that in a safe environment.